Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And this is the Pop Cult Podcast for this week. We will be reviewing two fairly recent releases. One of them, if you've listened to our podcast for a while, you've heard me say we were going to review for many different weeks. And we finally got a copy of it, so you're able to watch it. Later, we'll be talking about Mike Leigh's latest film, Hard Truths. But first, the movie I've been promising to review probably for 6 months now at this point, and that is Green Border, a Polish film from director, and I'm going to butcher her name when I say this, Agnieszka Holland, possibly?
That's Holland, right?
Yeah. She's a well-known Polish director who, funny enough, I found out directed The Secret Garden from 1993, which is kind of a surprise when I look at the rest of her filmography. So Green Border is in this treacherous and swampy forest between Belarus and Poland. Refugees from the Middle East and Africa are lured by government propaganda that promises easy passage to the European Union. Unable to cross into Europe and unable to turn back, they soon find themselves trapped in a rapidly escalating geopolitical standoff. So this movie was very harrowing, I would say is a good word to describe it.
Yes.
So I'll tell you, Green Border is actually a term. I found out, I didn't know that until now, but it refers to a poorly protected part of a national border. And the green often comes from the fact that it's dense forest or vegetation of some kind.
Yeah.
So there's not enough of a population there to warrant more border presence. Hence, it becomes a very easy place for people to cross through. What did you think in general about Green Border?
I mean, it doesn't really... It's no longer different from the stories and the harrowing stories that we have seen, read, or been interpreted when it comes to people crossing the borders in the States, right? Mm-hmm. So it is this idea that you're going against wilderness, and then not only are you going against wilderness, you're going against the racism and the anger towards the people that are protecting that border, who don't give a shit about you once you get there, and that will break laws because they're right on that edge. So who the fuck are you in order to get your human rights respected, right?
Well, there's also very little oversight. That's the big thing, is the Border Patrol soldiers, unless the activists in the movie are present, and even when they are, they just move the refugees far away and then block the activists from following them and then just dump them over the other side of the border anyway.
So it is a movie that is brutal as it is honest about it. It's also a movie that does not try to paint the guards as people just doing their jobs.
I think it does. I think she does try to humanize them.
But I like the fact that she doesn't humanize it in this, that they're Mary Sue's, right? That they don't know what's going on.
But I think the way I saw her portraying the guards was they're being told to do really bad things. There's a part of them that knows they should not be doing this, but they're also, like the general population of Poland, being fed propaganda about the refugees.
Well, especially like the way that they're like, their head up talks to them.
Yeah, he's just telling them straight up lies.
Yeah, because like in the way that, like, for example, the United States words out as to why it is that we can't have these immigrants who essentially are refugees from stuff that United States has made, will just be like, well, we don't have enough jobs, like we don't have enough blah blah blah, in a soft voice, but we don't know how it is during closed doors. And during closed doors, when we see the like guards on for the border, is a guy going like, they're fucking ruining our lives, like fuck them. If you find a body, just try to make it disappear, okay? Because it's like they're on the border, so they keep like lugging people back and forth.
Well, they physically throw people over barbed wire fences. Yeah,
fucked up version of like volleyball, but with humans.
Yeah. So the film was made by Agnieszka Holland. I hope I'm pronouncing that first name correctly. She is a Polish filmmaker who has been around for quite a while. I had heard of her breakout movie. She's 76, by the way, so she's been making movies for a while. Europa, Europa. I've never seen it. It came out in 1990, and it was a very kind of stylized take on the Holocaust. I think it's set on a train. I remember seeing very like bold images from it.
When I worked at the Holocaust Commission, Europa was mentioned a lot.
Well, she was accused of anti-Semitism
when she made it.
Yes.
Oh,
I don't know why. I haven't seen the movie. It might be something to watch in the future. However, she's a Polish filmmaker, the daughter of journalists. Her father was a communist and a Holocaust survivor, and her mother participated in the Warsaw Uprising.
Okay.
She had a very distant relationship with her father. I found a quote where she said, "He only really ever asked me to come around when he wanted to perform for his friends. So basically, like, be cute or whatever."
Or just show how smart she was.
Yeah, and so she didn't really have a great relationship with him. He died when she was 13 by suicide because he had been placed under house arrest by the communist government of Poland. So it's one of those, was it a suicide or was he murdered? And they said it was a suicide. Yeah. And it was interesting because while he was a communist, it sounds like he was at odds with the communist government, which is something I think a lot of people in the States don't really understand, is just because the government has some socialist or communist policies doesn't mean it's adhering closely to what communism is meant to be. Mm-hmm. In the same way that, like, the Nazis called themselves National Socialists. And if you were like a pure-blooded German, you might have benefited from some policies, but that was about it. And there weren't that many good ones.
Yeah.
And so that was an interesting part of her life, which I'm thinking, a father committing suicide at 13 after being under house arrest by the Polish government, going to be something that affects you. Yeah. I would think. She worked in film for a while, both writing and directing. She collaborated with Krzysztof Kieslowski on the screenplay for Three Colors Blue, which we've seen. And she, as I said before, was the director of the 1993 Secret Garden adaptation.
All right.
Her next project that she's working on is a biopic about Franz Kafka, who wrote The Metamorphosis. And you saw the Orson Welles adaptation of The Trial with Anthony Perkins. Yeah. That movie where he isn't being told what his charge is. It's just he's been accused. Yeah. And so she's making a biopic about him. I know Steven Soderbergh made a kind of like fantastic biopic on Franz Kafka back in the 90s. And so I'm assuming this one's probably going to be a little closer to the reality of what happened. So Green Border has been attacked by multiple Polish politicians. But it sounds like there's regular condemnations of her films from the Polish government because she's just very stark and honest about what she sees wrong with her home country. This even included, I think it was the Border Patrol Union put out a statement talking about how people who go to the cinema are pigs. And there were politicians who got their districts in Poland to ban the showing of the film Green Border. There were protests at some theaters, but then counter protests in support of the movie. So it's a movie, and the Academy Award, the Polish board that chooses what movie they want to put up as on the long list for foreign language films at the Academy Awards last year, I believe, didn't put this one up. They put up another movie called The Peasants. And they said openly, we don't want to put up Green Border because we think if we did, there would be retaliation against the arts board and we would have our funding cut.
Wow, at least they were honest about
it. Yeah. So it's a lot of information on the director and this movie. So let's get into it. We have three perspectives in the film. We have the refugees, we have the border guards, and we have the activists.
Yes.
We start with the refugees on board a plane. They are a Syrian family. There's also an Afghani woman on the same plane that they meet because they sit next to her. And all of them are coming to Belarus with the idea that they'll be able to cross into the European Union. And once they're in the European Union, they'll be granted asylum and they get to stay. The Syrian family is trying to get to the father's brother who lives in Sweden.
Yeah.
And the Afghani woman is wanting to stay in Poland because her brother served alongside Polish soldiers in Afghanistan, and he told her what great people they were, and he thought she would be happy there. So let's talk about that first part. So where we start out in a fairly innocuous space, we're in an airplane.
Yeah.
But that goes away very quickly, and we kind of descend into just primal chaos.
Yeah. I mean, they do so well by giving us information, but not overwhelming you as to what is going on. And you're also kind of thrown in there the way that they're thrown in there. They're not told everything, which I think they probably were not told everything because the person who was trying to get them, like the uncle, knew that they would probably back away if they knew how hard it was going to be.
Did the uncle know that they were going to get ditched at that fence?
I think he kind of, like, the way the response that he gave,
Yeah,
there was like by the like second half of the movie, he was just kind of like,
there's some guilt.
Yeah, there's some guilt, and he's just like, get to this zone, and it's something that they're like, we don't know where that zone is.
Well, because like their phones die, so they don't have mapping to help them get anywhere.
Yes. So it was a great mix of, you think at first like the Afghani woman might be with them just because of the way that she's dressed. The Afghani woman happens to not speak the same language as them, gives up her like window chair to the son, and the mother of the family explains that they've lost everything, that it was too dangerous.
We see a little later Bashir, the father,
Yeah,
when he has his shirt off and he has scars on his back, and then his wife, I believe that character's name is Amina.
Yeah.
She mentions to or is Amina the Afghani woman? Layla was the Afghani woman. So Amina tells Layla that her husband was tortured by the regime in Syria, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's clear that if they stayed there, he probably would continue to be targeted until he was like imprisoned and executed.
Yes.
They're also with their grandfather. Later, we hear him mention something about the camps. So they were in displacement camps. I have to say, because I come from America and they don't give us much information on this, it's not focused on very much. I don't know if those camps were in Syria. I assume they were probably refugee camps in neighboring countries. Yeah. Often how there were like Palestinian refugee camps, I believe in Lebanon at one point. And so they're in a very precarious situation.
Yeah. They've lost everything.
And so all they have is the uncle in Sweden. That is it. When they get ditched by the driver.
Yeah.
And are tossed into the forest. Did you have a sense that, because I think that Holland does a really good job of pacing, I didn't feel that they were hopeless yet.
Yeah, there was this interesting thing of it just being like, okay, they're gonna cross. Also, like the setup of different stuff. For example, the grandfather allows his granddaughter to use the phone until she falls asleep
on the airplane. Yeah.
Well, no, like when they're in the forest.
Okay.
And so that becomes anger between Bashir and his father, just being like, why did you do that? We need that phone.
Well, I think more interesting, that scene, it starts with the grandfather gets out his prayer mat.
Yeah.
And goes to, and we see that his feet are just infected.
Yes. From all the walking.
And he mentioned something later about they got infected in the camps.
Yes.
Because they just, bad hygiene, they weren't being cared for. Mm-hmm. And so he's going about doing his morning prayers. And that's when Bashir's phone dies, and he's like, you can see he's kind of trying to struggle between, do I wait until my father's done with his prayers, or this is really urgent, so I need him to just hand me the fucking phone already.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting that we never see Bashir engage in Islamic practice. We only see his father. Because the film is telling us a story in that moment without ever going any deeper than that.
Yeah, it's a story of a man who's lost his faith in religion after everything that he's gone through.
And And it's this interesting thing of she's also pointing out perspective, right? Even among the Syrians, we have different perspectives. For some of them, what they experienced drew them closer to Allah and their religion. For others, it convinced them there is no God looking over them, or if there is a God, he's completely disconnected and cold.
Which is no different from Holocaust survivors.
Yeah. The things escalate from there. I'm trying to remember the timeline of events. So they're in the woods, the phones have died, and they come across. Is that when the soldiers show up?
No, this is during the time that I think is Layla is able to turn on her phone briefly. She's like, "Oh, hey, there's a road over here."
Now I remember they come across Polish soldiers on the road who are very friendly to them.
It's first she goes to that farmer.
Oh, yeah.
She's like, "Hey, can I get some water?" And she's willing to pay him.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any food? He gives her some apples. And then then he's like pointing to probably like the house. He's like, if you walk to the house, there's more food. And right as she turns around, he pulls up his phone calling. And that's when she looks at him like a glare and just starts running.
And so they have this encounter with the Polish guards who at first seem friendly. They give the kids candy. They're loaded onto a truck. They're told this truck goes to Poland or to Warsaw, I think, because they're already in Poland. But it's going to drop you. It goes by Germany first. But instead, they go to the border with Belarus, and they're forced to climb under barbed wire back into the Belarusian side.
Yeah, they don't know this until the I think it's like the Croatians that they're with, that they find themselves with, start going, "No Belarus, no Belarus." They start screaming. And so the family's like remaining calm, thinking these guys have gone crazy.
But they've been through this before. Yes. We find out that it's this constant taking human beings, throwing them on one side of the border, then throwing them onto the other. And as the Polish supervisor of the border patrol says, if you find a dead body, just make it disappear.
Yeah.
And we see at one point that Polish guards literally chuck someone's dead body over a fence. So it's on the Belarusian side, not on the Polish. Because there's this concern about not letting this information get out to the general public.
Yes.
Because the phones become this tool by the refugees of recording messages and getting those messages out so that the Polish public can see it and start to question the actions of their government. We have Yannick, who is our border guard that we're kind of focused on and following. He has a pregnant wife, Kasia, and it's being fed this propaganda about the refugees and how the Polish government is saying that they're actually Russian plants and that they're meant to infiltrate Poland and then commit acts of terrorism once they're embedded, which echoes a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric in the States.
And
everywhere, really. All of the EU, right?
They have the same kind of fucking attitude towards them.
Yeah.
If they're conservative.
And it's... and to me, I read that, and I mean, it's what it is these are the actions of unpopular governments who are attempting to take a justifiably angry population, but direct their wrath at a marginalized other group that has no connection to the reason why their country is a shithole.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing in the States, same thing in Poland, same thing in all these countries. That the problem in your country are powerless immigrant outsiders. And once again, it echoes Nazi propaganda, right? It echoes because Belgium, people don't really talk about that, the essential Holocaust that the Belgians committed in the Congo. And it's always and we watched Battle of Algiers.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that the whole reason why the French government took over Algeria was that there was an unpopular king at the time. So they took reports of pirates along the North African coast attacking French ships and turned it into a campaign to conquer Algeria to stop these evil pirates. And what it did was it took the populace and directed that hate towards a group that had no power over them whatsoever.
Yeah.
And this is a common tactic of all imperialist capitalist regimes. Uh, and it's something that Holland clearly understands. But I think she also understands that the people doing the dirty work on the ground, there is still a humanity in them, but it's the systems that they're being brought up in that is slowly drowning that humanity in them.
Yeah.
And we see that through Yannick's arc. His wife, there's an interesting intersection when she's at the supermarket, and there's these border guards that are just like in front of her in line, and they're being very noisy. And then the woman behind her, Julia, who seems like a throwaway character, but it's going to become important later, speaks up and says that if these guards just get out of the way, there's a pregnant woman here. And she happens to see a newspaper on the rack at the cash register that shows some of the atrocities that are going on, points to that. But then you have interesting Cassia, who's this character in the center, whose husband is a border guard, who tries to defend the border guards.
Yeah.
And sort of chastise Julia. And there's like a very tense exchange there that neither woman really wants to go at each other, because I think they understand inherently that's not going to fix anything.
Yeah.
But then that sows this seed of doubt in Cassia for the rest of the film. And you can see her, I mean, by the end of the movie, she's looking up information about things that her husband's work is doing.
Yeah.
And keeps trying to tell him, you don't have to do this.
Yeah.
So what did you think of the character of Yannick and what he goes through in this movie and how Holland portrays him?
I think it's also the fact that this man we're in the watch of him losing his humanity. Even though he does one good thing that you could say, that does not cover up or undo all the other things that he's either witnessed or done or been like, aware of. It's also like he is so full of anger, and his excuse like towards his wife when she's like, our friend works at a supermarket and makes just as good money, better money than you do. And he's like, it's my duty. It is this nationalism that doesn't make sense, because if you're so horrified about the things that you're doing, then why would you want to like pin that to a flag, to a culture that isn't willing to open their arms to take in a few people?
Well, I think, but it makes sense that he's doing this, right? Like it does.
Like he's brainwashed.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is nationalism is a form of brainwashing, because what it does is it subsumes your humanity in favor of an artificially constructed nation state.
Yeah.
That, if we really dig deep, is a slave master, right?
Yeah.
Like, we are the property of the nations we're born into. Hence why we need a passport, why they need to track us where we go, why you have an identification number. They provide you with some benefits, but I feel like the benefits do not outweigh what the actual intent of it is, which is the same reason why you put plastic tags on livestock's ears.
Yeah.
Is so you can track them, and you know who's who, and you know how old they are, and you know when you can put them out to pasture when they're no longer valuable anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's something present in, or maybe it's inherent in just the nation state structure, which is something I think that makes visions of communism difficult, because communism does rely on a nation state, but it's a very different kind of nation state than most of us in the West have ever experienced. Because I was very interested to know where she was going to go with the soldiers, because I didn't want her to give them an overly sympathetic portrayal. And I think she did a good job of walking that line where, like you said, Yannick, he does the one good thing. And it's good that he does that. And he does it for people that we know better than he knows.
Yeah.
And so we understand what these people have gone through and what they have lost to get here. And he doesn't. But what he does is he sees another human being and just goes, I can't do this to them anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, at the end of the movie, in the epilogue, we do see him engaged in a refugee operation. But once again, it's kind of left vague. We don't know. I think he's wearing fatigues. So it seems like it's an official capacity, but he's working alongside people who were his enemies when it came to these refugees, which we'll talk about that and what that means. So then we have the activists. They are a group of mostly like lawyers, anarchists, people who see Poland's treatment of these refugees as completely inhumane. But the ones who are lawyers are constantly reminding everybody of this line that they have to walk, where they can help them up to a point. They can't guide them. They can't give them a ride. They can provide them with food and water.
Yeah.
They can provide them with medical care.
They can't provide them with a phone. They can't provide them
Well, they can provide them with a charge for their phone.
Yeah.
They can provide them with the paperwork they need to file for asylum. But the whole thing is, if you don't have the person with the paperwork, then what's the use of the paperwork, right? And so there's this constant, like the same way with the Belarusian soldiers and the Polish soldiers, the activists are also in this antagonistic relationship with the border guard of trying to get to the refugees before the border patrol can throw them back over the fence.
Yeah, and there's also like this exclusionary zone.
It's
it's supposed to be like where they like the immigrant, like the refugees crossed, that they're not supposed to be in.
What it is the government has declared a national emergency over the migrant crisis. So they've blocked off a strip of land between the border and the rest of the country as the exclusion zone, where it's only legal for authorized personnel to enter.
Yeah.
And so that keeps the activists from helping people directly get across the border.
Yeah, and it's also this thing of it being like that if the refugees are within that area, they're most likely to be pushed out to the other side of the border.
No media can be there to document them. Yeah.
And it's also like it's a hindrance to the people who live there, as we see later on with Julia.
The activists are interesting because they bring Julia, or she kind of brings herself into their world. Julia is a psychiatrist who I think has lived in France, and we find out her husband died of COVID, and she's a native Pole, so she's moved back to Poland. She has a house in the country, and I would say if you look at her, you think she's probably your average like liberal.
Yeah.
Just she's upper middle class. She is a bleeding heart over these things, but you're not really sure how far she's willing to go.
Yeah.
And then we see how far she's willing to go. And even the activists, one of them later, Zuku, says like, oh, I just thought you were another like weak liberal, but you really proved yourself.
Yeah.
So what did you think of Julia's character?
I think Julia is, for all of us, what we expect us to want to do if we've ever volunteered to work in any refugee or even like nonprofit status when you're like following the rules. A lot of times when you go into these places, you're stuck within the red tape, right, of what it's supposed to be. If you do this, you're gonna get like the police are gonna be on you. If you do this, you'll get arrested. And I like the fact that Julia's like, when she is met with the punishment that she's given, she's almost like, that's it? That's the punishment? And compared to people dying, I'll take the fucking punishment then.
Yeah.
And I'll do what I have to do.
When it doesn't discourage her, she goes right back to what she's doing. She just has to reconfigure. And there's a really great scene between her and her friend Basia, I think, who Julia's car is totaled by the border patrol. And they need two vehicles to help these African refugees out. And she gets the friend to come over, but doesn't tell her why. And when she arrives, explains why she needs the vehicle.
If you don't explain, it's like,
well, she kind of implies.
What happens is one of the other people who's helping out just blabs out.
Oh yeah. And so then we have this. It's a schism that is created between these two friends, and I mean, I read it as like that was the end of their friendship, essentially, because Julia is devoting her life to this.
Yeah, my favorite is her friend's like, I can't let you do this. I hope you understand. And she and it's like, and she says like, she's like, I understand, but she says something that's kind of clever. It was cool.
Well, she kind of says back to her the same thing in reverse of like, well, no, I can understand, but like it makes me ashamed of you, essentially. Like I understand you're afraid, but like, you don't think I'm afraid? I just got arrested. Like,
Yeah, and it's also Julia is she is that thing that we talked about before, either in, like in private, on how childless people
are ungovernable.
are governor. She's
No,
a
no, yeah, yeah. Childless people are ungovernable,
yeah,
meaning that when you don't have children, you have nothing to lose. They
yeah,
can't really hurt you
yeah,
because you're like, well, it's just me.
yeah.
It's not like I have to go, oh, but I can't cross this line because I have these mouths to feed. I don't have any mouths to feed, so I can easily cross that
And the
line.
thing is, like, she doesn't have children, and she's lost her husband over a year ago towards a disease that many of us do believe could have been avoidable had we just followed the rules,
Mhm.
right? And it's like,
We're not even, I would call them rules, precautions.
yeah,
You know how like you put on a seatbelt, which I guess most Americans we're finding out don't. Uh, but yeah, and I love that detail's added in there.
yeah,
And the fact that we see it's a lot of the activists wearing masks.
yeah. And I do like that it's the friendship that she starts with Zuko, who happens to be working with like the attorney people, the ones that are following the line. Because it's obvious she wants to do more. Zuko wants to do more, but can't because she's sort of like until her and Julia get together.
When the lawyer's like, they are right in saying we're not of much use if they throw us in prison. And it is like, yeah. And I think that's part of something I've learned from reading a lot about communism and communist activism is the idea that you need to know what your role is and stick to that role. Some people, it is just to be legal advocates. And those are not the people you want to put on the front lines because you don't want to lose them. They're fighting a different war in a different venue. But then you have someone like Zuko and Julia who are going to go beyond the legal limits.
Which is like you need to let them do it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is they're allowed to. It's just the lawyers withdraw and go back to another place where they had been working before because they're just like we can't go there because we're doing a different thing.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say what it is in case people watch this movie, but the solution Julia comes up with of where to take these African immigrants is, I think, very well thought out.
Yeah.
And it crosses a professional boundary.
Yeah.
But it's Holland, I think, pointing out that all of the norms and professionalism goes out the window in the face of atrocity.
Yeah.
That like until we have fixed the injustices in our society, we can't really say, well, you can't go that far to protect a human being. You have to go as far as possible to protect a human being. And I think this movie does a really good job of showcasing that.
Yeah.
What were some things about this movie that you did not like as much? Was there anything that you felt was a weak spot in the movie?
I just kind of thought like the relationship between the guard and his wife was kind of weak at some point.
But is that more to do with your inherent dislike of those border people? And so you were kind of holding yourself back from allowing to see his humanity?
I mean, that could have been it. I think it's again, it's one of those movies that I can't be like, oh, there's not anything that I dislike about it because the end result of it was just like kind of blew my mind in a way. Like, and we're not going to talk about the end because it's like you need to just watch the movie.
It's probably one of the most powerful punctuation marks I've ever seen in a movie.
And I honestly, I thought like when
I didn't know it was gonna go.
I thought she was going to be like maybe a little bit younger to have done something like that.
No.
But then to see her age, it's kind of like, oh, she's definitely someone who does not give a fuck.
Well, like if you look at her filmography, she's never given a fuck. And I think if you look at her parents, you can see they taught her not to give a fuck.
As like what an average Polish person or a Polish person that's like has more leaning towards political ideas that we have thinks about this film.
Yeah. Because there were some things I felt near the end that became a little saccharine to me, but I also understand why they maybe needed to be there because there are moments in this movie that are just devastating.
Yeah.
and like so painful to watch. And there's characters who disappear from the narrative and you never hear from them again, but you're placed in the shoes of other characters because that's what's experienced in real life is when the border guards take you away, they're not going to give, Julia a phone call to let her know what happened to that refugee.
Yeah.
They want that refugee. They want her to forget she ever met that refugee.
Yeah. And I think there's some pretty good, we get really good reasonings as to why Julia is committed to what she ends up doing. And it's heartbreaking when you think about it, right? And it makes sense. Oh, she's a psychologist. Of course, she's just going to like feel this a little bit harder than someone else.
Well, she can empathize and put herself in their shoes.
Yeah. Humanity in that person fully, and then wants to reach out to just be like, do they just need a hug? What do they need? And then the anger that she feels about everyone else when the promises that they give. Because there's a particular scene like that has to do with the hospital and the glaring that Julia does to the nurses after what happens. Like, because they're just like, oh, it's better than being close to the border. And she almost just wants to be like, you guys did fucking nothing. And I had to witness this.
A death.
Yeah. And it's like a second death again.
So I was worried a bit when I saw that Holland's mother received an award from Israel for her participation in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Not that I have any problem with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It was a good thing. I wish they had been able to kill more Nazis. But the fact that it came from Israel made me worried. Yeah. And especially a movie like this. I was thinking in my head, like, please do not let this woman be a hypocrite and is like, oh, I love refugees except for Palestinians, right? Yeah. And it appears though Holland has gone to Israel before and accepted awards from like film groups there. So that made me a little worried. But I did find in 2023 a quote that she said, where she said, there is nothing that Israel is doing can be justified in Judaism. And so reading that quote settled my fears. Yeah. Where I thought, no, she gets it. But and I can also understand why she would have a complicated relationship with Israel, being the child of 2 Holocaust refugees, and the way Israel has been sold to Holocaust survivors and their children.
But she has probably a different stance because she is Polish.
Yeah, and also probably and the fact that she still is in Poland, I believe. Yeah. She understands that her place is not in Israel, her place is in Poland because that's where her roots are. Yeah. And that's the place she wants to change and make better. So 2 questions for you here at the end. Would you want to watch more Agnieszka Holland films after having watched Green Border?
Yes.
And would you recommend this film to our audience?
Yes.
Why would you recommend it?
I just feel like it's not a feel-good movie, but it's something that we have to witness in order for us to not have this weird belief that Europe is better than the United States. Yeah. Like we might have moved from the United States because of what's going on, but it was also an easier transition for us.
Well, also I think it's Europe. Parts of Europe are better than the United States in terms of like quality of life. Yeah. But there are also many of the same similar conflicts. The thing we can't forget is it's still a singular planet, and that even if you go to the other side of it, those problems don't like vanish. You see them show up in new forms based on where they are. And so, yeah, I think if you're someone who wants to see what it's like for these refugees, while the film is not a documentary, it's clearly pulled from a lot of real life scenarios and incidents that have happened. And it is a tough watch, but I do think it tries to find hope. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it shows you there are people out there fighting. Yeah. And that sometimes that's the best that you can hope for. Pansy, angry and depressed, lashes out at family and strangers. Her constant criticism isolates her, except from her cheerful sister Chantal, who remains sympathetic despite their differences. This is Hard Truths, the latest film from director Mike Leigh. So we did a Mike Lee series last year, and it wasn't the first time I'd ever watched his movies, but it was the first time I really dug into his work and watched a bunch of movies back to back. I know he started with some made for TV kind of kitchen sink dramas. We didn't delve into those. We kind of stuck to feature films. And I don't even think we watched all of those. There's one film that I think is one before this one that we haven't seen. And it's a historical drama. I absolutely love Mike Lee's movies. I think he became one of my favorite directors watching those movies. Uh, Talk to me about Mike Lee. What do you like about him? Are there movies of his that stand out to you?
Happy Go Lucky is probably the one that like sticks to my brain always because I think it's because the first one I saw of his. Um, it's very much slice of life, middle class or lower middle class families, and it's the drama that's contained within it.
But no melodrama.
Yeah, it's either like the struggle of making money, the struggle of keeping a marriage alive and happy, the struggle of maybe feeling fulfillment within your life,
or just personal conflict, like two personalities that clash.
Yeah, personalities that clash, and maybe that one person who's trying to be as uplifting as possible while the other one is not there. Hard truths like
we're not getting into hard truths yet.
Pump
the brakes on hard truths. We're just talking about Mike Lee in general.
But it's weird because he's just like so refreshing when you think about him compared to other directors, right? And this is not to not to shame. Is like, for example, I really like Lynch, but David Lynch is such a different director versus Mike Lee, and Mike Lee feels very natural. He feels as if like he can come into a room, figure out what the story is, but it's going to be a story that he develops with those actors so they can be the genuine version of those characters and maybe slip in a little bit about their personal lives without it feeling like he's trying so hard or these actors are trying so hard.
Well, I think you nailed it. I think he gives off a sense that this is effortless, but that's not true.
Yeah.
And he makes his films seem deceptively simple.
Yes.
Because it's just let's take Happy Go Lucky. It's a teacher who needs driving lessons.
Yeah.
And she has a group of friends she hangs out with, and her driving instructor is a very angry man. And that's it. That's the premise. But from that premise in Happy Go Lucky, he pulls so much, and he makes a film that's about, in my opinion, I think it's a film about the need for good teachers, because that character in that film encounters her driving instructor both as a child and an old man.
Yeah.
One of her students and a ranting homeless man she comes across. And she has such empathy, she's able to see the humanity in these people who often can't see humanity in her or even themselves.
Yeah. And it's also the funny of being like the combativeness of these two personalities where she is an amazing teacher and he's a bad teacher.
Yeah. And you see what makes someone a good teacher in that movie.
Yeah.
So I saw in Hard Truths a lot of threads from other Mike Lee works. I think our main character, Pansy, reminds me a bit of David Thewlis's Johnny from Naked.
Yeah.
Someone who is just so mad at the world. Mm-hmm. And like, you can understand why they're mad at the world.
Yeah.
Of course, Marie Jean Baptiste, who plays Pansy, had previously collaborated with Lee on Secrets and Lies, one of his best films ever.
Yes.
And so also Michelle Austin also had a small part in that movie too, who plays Chantal, her sister. And so seeing Marie Jean Baptiste in a Mike Lee movie makes me think of that. However, she is a totally different character in this movie than she is in Secrets and Lies.
Oh, yeah, Secrets and Lies, she's like so passive and
she's the one in control of her emotions in that movie. And in this movie, she has no control of her emotions. It also reminded me of a Mike Lee movie not a lot of people talk about, All or Nothing, which probably has the best performances I've ever seen from Leslie Manville and Timothy Spall, who's a regular contributor
Yeah.
of it says the unfortunate addition of James Corden being in the movie, his only Mike Lee work. But it's the Manville and Spall play a married couple in a London estate, and it's one of the most honest portrayals I've seen of just like working class people and the difficulty of holding on to a marriage,
Yeah.
and it's just beautifully done. And so you see those like little threads here. But what I think is so interesting about this movie is this is Mike Lee's first uh majority black cast.
Yes.
And that was so intriguing to me because he's focused his entire career on sort of white middle class people with occasional comments on race. Like Secrets and Lies was probably his most direct comment. But this is interesting because I think he's acknowledging the black middle class as a predominant portion of the British population at this point.
Yes.
And so a lot of the critiques he levied at white middle class people, he's like, well, we can level those at black people as well, because they've kind of joined, some of them at least. And with this family, we do have that. Pansy's husband, Curtly, runs like a renovation construction business.
Yeah.
And so they live in a very nice house in a very nice neighborhood, and they clearly have good money. So talk to me about just some of your overall feelings about Hard Truths. What were some of the things you thought about what Lee was trying to say? How the movie made you feel?
Hard Truths, much to I think all of Mike Lee's movies, lends itself to be viewed more than once. It also has to do with the fact that like you can just go over through the whole story, but then the ability of like maybe rewatching it will make you hone in more into the performances and characters. I was tense every time Pansy was on screen. Every time. There was like not a good word that she had for another human being.
Even herself.
Even herself, up until like her visit with her sister.
Well, what is the first moment we see Pansy in the movie?
She screams awake.
Is she like, yeah, jolts awake screaming?
Yes. And it is like thinking back on it, it makes me so sad for her. Because the thing is, like, if Pansy is walking around being this person, this means that like her husband married her knowing that she was like this and never going, you and I, we're going to work this out.
Or let's get you help. Let's get you like a therapist or something.
And then like later on, it's sort of like how she has these outbursts and that she just looks so petrified. And she knows that she did something wrong, but it's too late. She can't take it back. And she has to like dwell on it. And then
she never apologizes.
She never apologizes. And then she's wondering why her stomach aches when she's just like harboring so much anger inside of her.
When like she wants to sleep all day. So it's clear signs of like depression and anxiety, yes. Like without a doubt. One of the things I liked about the movie is the source of Pansy's anger is never directly explained. Mike Lee and his cast provide us with mentions of things from her past, but there's never a moment of, you're angry because blank.
Yeah.
We kind of have to infer.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that because it's much more authentic to the way we interact with each other. No one is ever going to sit you down and sort of tell you their complete story so that you understand why the way they are.
Yeah, it's like how, for example, I've talked to you about like how I have tried my best to start asking more questions to my own family as to what was occurring during certain times in my lifetime when I was like, ooh, they were really mad, but I was a kid and I was like really unaware as to what were the happenings going in the background. Because much like when Pansy's sister, like Chantel, is having conversations with her daughter's like, Pansy always makes everything about her. She's always angry. Like, what the fuck is going on?
That's what her daughters are saying.
Yeah. And Chantel, who understands the situation, is kind of like, you don't know, but isn't also like ballsy enough to like really go into the nitty gritty, because I think Chantel feels guilty.
Yeah. The one of the things that Pansy says often during the movie was everyone's asking me to do things. And I had to sit and think about that. Does anyone really ask her to do anything the whole movie other than Chantal asking her to come over for the Mother's Day?
I think it's like this unspoken um it's this unspoken pressure of being a wife and an unspoken pressure about being a mother, right?
That she knows the expectations are there even if they're unspoken.
Yeah, so she is supposed to keep the house clean. She's supposed to make dinner. She's supposed to make sure that like things run as smoothly as possible.
Well, it's like when she comes home at that one point and her son Moses has just left a bunch of shit out on the counter.
Yeah. And it's like, we'll be honest, like, she does not go over to him and say, hey, can you please not do this?
Yeah, she never approaches anything from a place of gentleness.
Yeah, but we also don't know how many times has she told him, don't leave your food out like that, or clean and the knife after you've done it. There's a moment where she sort of like has to like tell her son, clean the plate before he's like done doing something as her sister's visiting. It is this thing that you start to realize like she's probably without meaning to, but did it anyways, has like done everything for them and then is mad that then they can't do for themselves.
Yeah. Well, and then we do find out some background that she had to do a lot of raising of Chantal because their mother was single, the father left. And so it's kind of implied that the mother had to leave the house to work and kind of instilled a fear of the world into Pansy and was maybe more rough and brutal with her. Because that's another thing that I found so interesting is Pansy won't even go in her own backyard.
Yeah.
She hears a bird near the beginning of the movie and like gets scared. A fox shows up and she like loses her shit about it. Yeah. And so there's this fear of leaving the safety of her home, but she doesn't even feel comfortable in her own home.
Yeah, not even in like her back garden, which is like just grass and a shed.
I do want to say something about Marie Jean Baptiste. Not even an Academy Award nomination for this performance.
That's such a fucking shame.
Here's who got nominated. Fernanda Torres, who was in that Emilia Perez movie, which I have zero interest in watching. Demi Moore for The Substance. Carla Sofia Gascon, maybe she's the one, or I think one of them is from I don't know which one of those. I think that might be the one from Emilia Perez. Fernanda Torres, I'm not sure about that one. Cynthia Erivo from Wicked, which I don't think that movie needed any acting award. None of the acting in the movie is good.
Yeah.
And then Mikey Madison for Honora, which I'll give her that because I do think that's a great performance. But yeah, I think you kick out the Emilia Perez lady and you put Marianne Jean Baptiste in there because this is one of the best performances of the last year.
BAFTA, like.
Oh, I think she was nominated but didn't win.
Yeah,
Yeah. But she's also an older woman, and I think there's some prejudice.
Yeah, and here's the thing. She gets to say that she has collaborated with Mike Lee, which is something that most actors have wanted or begged. And it's funny because I think we saw an American actor say, I asked him if I could work with him, and he was like, I only work with British. And he was just like,
yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Well, he's interested in telling stories about British life.
But it's also like, it's like him going like, hey, I only shop local.
Yeah. Or it's just like, I don't know how to tell American stories. I know how to tell British stories.
That person was gonna play British. I think it's just sort of like you have other.
He'd know it's because he does so much collaboration with his actors, and so
it would feel genuine. It would only make sense if it was like an American raised and like
it would. And like the thing is, he wants them to have authentic life experiences that connect them to that character. And so if you grew up in New York City, you're not really going to know what it was like to grow up in Manchester.
No.
That's just not going to be a thing. What do you think of Michelle Austin's performance? Because as good as Marianne Jean-Baptiste is as Pansy, it's also a very big performance. So it can kind of steal the show. Chantal, that's a more muted role. It's a more subtle performance.
But I think it creates such a beautiful balance.
Mm-hmm.
Because Chantal is so different from her.
She's so warm.
Yes. And the way that she can handle Pansy, but it's not like this handling like going, oh fuck, I'm gonna have to go deal with my fucking crazy sister. It's just her being like, okay, I am here. What do you need me for? But also she has this deep understanding as to where this anger is coming from. She understands it better than anyone else because she knows she benefited to a certain degree.
But she didn't have to be the one in charge.
Yeah, because she got to be raised by Pansy, while Pansy explains she, for example, doesn't like fried chicken because her mother would hover over her, making sure that she ate everything. And how it just seemed as if she was criticized for every little move that she made. So it made her this ball of anxiety that instead of just being I'm okay the way I am, she's going out in the world being what the fuck is wrong with you?
But I also think this isn't a film about the past.
Yeah.
Because Mike Leigh does not spend a lot of time trying to explain to us why Pansy is this way. I think what he is more interested in is the realistic nature in which you encounter pansies.
Yeah.
So Pansy has a name in the world. We call them Karens.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Mike Leigh is a very sensitive person. And I think he is able and very empathetic, and he's able to connect with characters. You think about Johnny from Naked is a repulsive character.
Yeah.
But even Mike Leigh is able to find this humanity in that character, that is still a person.
Yeah.
They're complicated. And so I think Mike Leigh is almost refusing to accept this very shallow narrative about older women who have these public freakouts. Instead of seeing them as an object of mockery and ridicule, he has such sympathy for them, and he doesn't want to know. He doesn't even care why they're that way, because it doesn't matter. We can't go back in time. There's nothing I can do to change what happened, made them that way. And so he's very interested, because when you look at a lot of this movie, it's very episodic in that it's Pansy being put in a situation where she has to interact with someone who doesn't know her.
Yeah.
And I think he's very interested to examine, how does a person like Pansy, with this great sense of anxiety and fear, kind of bleed that out into other people and make them present their worst selves? And it doesn't make her a villain. It's just, why do we let people turn us into our worst selves when they show us theirs?
Yeah.
Why does it have to be reciprocal like that? Why can't we? Because that's what makes Chantal different, is Chantal never throws back at Pansy what Pansy throws at her.
Yeah.
And I think there's also something to be said about where these women spend most of their days.
Yeah.
Pansy spends most of her days at home. She is a housewife. And she doesn't interact with anybody. Chantal works at a salon, and we get multiple scenes of her that have no bearing on the plot. They're there to establish her as a character, of her talking with clients as she does their hair, or getting her hair done and talking to one of the other hairdressers. And the joy that these people are finding in each other's company, just sharing the sort of mundane details of their lives. Bad things happen to them, but they don't wallow in it. They just it's one of those, that's life, right? These things happen. I can't imagine Pansy. I can't imagine her in that environment, but what she's sitting in that chair and she's just tense. She's clutching her purse close. The hairstylist is trying to talk to her, and she's giving one-word answers, or when she does give an answer, it's just very acidic and mean.
Well, I think there's also this clear indication of the difference between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
One lives in isolation in this house that's whatever stories it is.
It's a beautiful
It's a
house.
beautiful house,
Big.
but it's cold and it's just blank in color versus Chantel lives in a community.
She lives she has like a condo, an
She
apartment.
has an
Yeah.
apartment. She lives in a community. Well, she basically is working amongst her community because she does hair for Black women. She gets to hear about their experiences and their lives.
Well, she and her daughters are very open about what's going on in their lives, as opposed to
Yes.
like Pansy with her son Moses, who barely utters a word in the whole movie.
Yeah, Moses, who won't tell her where he goes for his walks, or that like he's being bullied or he's just being like made fun of.
And he also, I think it's interesting, doesn't really know how to stand up for himself. I think because he was raised by this woman who's so intense, it kind of scared him to ever speak up.
Well, I think it also is this indication of the way the father acts.
Yeah.
The father doesn't respond. The father doesn't do anything. All he's doing is keeping the peace and continuing his life. And then it's sort of like, or keeping a distance from her.
And then I think there's interesting moments that, and the thing I love about Mike Leigh is he has no interest in some grand plot narrative. His films are character studies. And so what makes them so interesting is he's just, what would this character be like in this situation? I just want to know. So Pansy's nieces, Alicia and Kayla, we get separate scenes of each of them in their respective workplaces, dealing with workplace conflicts. And they're not things that ever come up again. It's just single moments.
Yeah, and it's also like the differences that their boss act around.
Yeah, and I think Mike Leigh is very interested to see. We see Pansy never dealing with conflict well. Like just this, there's a guy who stops and asks her if she's staying in her parking space or not because she's sitting in her car. And she just won't even talk to him. So finally he gets out of his car. He's very frustrated. He just wants an answer. And then she starts yelling at him. Now he snaps and yells back at her.
Yeah.
And then we have scenes like Alicia, who works for a cosmetics company and proposes a new idea that she has a lot of faith in. And her boss just shoots it down right away. And not a very like kind way. She doesn't do it in the worst way possible, but it's just a very dismissive way that doesn't make Alicia feel very good.
Like, yeah, she's dismissing the numbers. She's dismissing everything.
All the work that was done.
Yeah.
And then you have Kayla, who works, I think, like in a law firm, or at least someplace where they're drawing up contracts that have a lot of legalese in the language.
Yeah.
And there was an error. Her boss even affirms, this isn't your fault. This is just all of us, we didn't pay attention. And then, can you go back through and do this? And Kayla, it's more work, but she goes, yeah, because she's in an environment where she's not being chastised, something you could probably relate to, having work environments like that. They don't make you want to work harder, do they?
No.
They make you want to work much less. And so we see these two women that are in Pansy's life dealing with conflict. And no one in this movie, other than Pansy, approaches things the way she does.
No.
She is singular in just her. And I think what I realize is she's not. The anxiety and the anger we see, this is an end point from something else. I think Pansy is an intensely emotionally sensitive person.
Yeah.
And I think from a young age, she was that way. I, as someone with autism, having read about female autism, there's a lot here that sounds like it looks like it.
Yeah.
Right. And because she was treated so unkindly and so harshly when she would express sensitivity, she has developed this. She's gone from being sensitive in a caring way to sensitive in an angry, if I'm going to hurt, I want you to hurt too way.
Yeah.
Even if I don't even know you, even if you're not being
dog that after like the dog has been bitten by another dog, suddenly they can't be around other dogs.
And I also see some OCD in there.
Yeah.
The way she needs her house is so cold and sterile. The way she's so afraid, like whenever Chantal offers her to sleep over at her apartment, and she goes, "But what about the plants?" And and all the bugs. And you're like, there's no bugs in this apartment, right? If they are, they're very like out of the way and not bothering anybody.
Yeah.
And so it's this fear of things not being the way she needs them to be. But even in her home, where it should be the way she wants. She's absolutely miserable.
Yeah,
There's
she
not
talks about how she feels alone when she's in the house alone, and then she feels alone when her family's in there.
and so she's just possibly Mike Leigh's saddest character.
Oh yeah, I mean towards the end, which I'm not going to like talk about exactly what happened.
When it is, he doesn't answer all the questions. He just kind of, we're just seeing a moment from her life.
From my interpretation was now that the husband is hurt and they're both sitting there separate from each other, it's almost like my interpretation was him being like, I left her alone in her pain. Is she going to leave me alone in mine?
Abandonment, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there's so much about like, and this is not ruining the film, like Pansy lost her mother 5 years ago and
is still not over it and unable to handle it.
And it was obvious that she was also kind of her mother's caretaker to a certain point.
She's the one who found her.
She was the one who found her when she died. And so it's almost like the removal of her mother was a removal of something of the ritual of her life. And I don't think the husband helped her during that mourning time. It just seemed like he just kept going on with his business.
Because that's all he really does is he goes to work.
Yes. And allowed her to be. And I think that made it worse.
One thing I love about Mike Leigh movies is every casting decision is pitch perfect. Characters who appear for one scene are you can't imagine anyone else being that character. He finds, it's very Coen brothers in that he finds people who have a very interesting look to them. So he doesn't find people who are glamorous. He doesn't find people that are ugly. He just finds people that are interesting. And he also finds they're not just interesting looking, they also give really good performances, which probably goes back to that improvisational rehearsal style that he's adopted. He's been making movies for over 50 years at this point. He's 81. He is one of those directors that you're
gonna have a moment.
Like, he's gonna die in the next few years. I wish Mike Leigh could live forever, but like that's just simply not going to be.
I wish Mike Leigh would let us know he's been like, I don't know,
stockpiling dozens of movies.
Also, like, here's like I have a mention.
Yeah, because I don't know who the next Mike Leigh is. I don't know who's making these types of movies that. Because
I forgot like the name of her. She works with Michelle Williams a lot. Like
Wendy and Lucy.
Yeah.
You've got me, Old Joy. God damn it. Her name, I feel like Jeff Goldblum. I'm like, it's a thing. I want to see it's God.
Something.
I keep thinking Amy Klobuchar, and I know that's not it. I went Amy Klobuchar, indie filmmaker. As soon as I see it, I'm gonna be like, God damn, yeah, Kelly Reichardt. I knew it was something German. I kept thinking Alicia Rohrwacher, because that's another German sounding name. But Kelly Reichardt. I think she is the American Mike Leigh to an extent, but it's still her movies. There's something about them that keeps them from being as grounded as a Mike Leigh movie. Like, his movies are so grounded.
I think it really has to do more with her casting, even though her casting is pretty good.
She still casts like people that we know from other things.
Yeah.
And with a Mike Leigh movie, he kind of like discovered Timothy Spall to a certain degree. Or like he cast Leslie Manville, who's probably one of the greatest like chameleonic actors who've ever lived.
Yeah.
Who can play anything. This makes me want more from Marie Jean-Baptiste. She's only 57.
Yeah.
And I just want more from her. I know she was in Fabric, the Peter Strickland horror movie about the killer dress.
Yes.
But yeah, it makes me want to seek out more from her because she is just so incredibly good.
Yeah, she was like doing an accent that wasn't really hers. It was
like
not exactly Jamaican, but more Trinidadian.
Yeah, it's from the Caribbean, which it matches. It reminded me a lot of those Steve McQueen Small Axe movies.
Yes.
That were about those Caribbean immigrants to the UK. And yeah, it's just the actors here, their characters feel real. I feel like this world goes on without us watching the movie.
And as much as all his movies.
Yeah, and I think that's the sign of a good filmmaker is I feel like I'm just glimpsing a reality that is there whether I see it or not. Would you recommend Hard Truths to our audience? It's an hour and 37 minutes, so it's like that perfect wheelhouse of length.
You will be tense.
Yes.
You will be tense for a bit. It does
And
not
you're not going to
forever.
like her. You're not going to like her. You're going to dislike her. But I think if you listen to what Mike Lee is doing here, you're going to feel for her by the end of this movie. And you're going to understand her in the same way that like Chantal understands her. And I think that was what Mike Lee's goal was here. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure you check the show notes for all important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you're subscribed to be notified wherever it is you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find that we're doing a series of Shakespeare on film that's continuing this next week. We'll be reviewing Kenneth Branagh in Henry V, Ian McKellen in Richard III, and Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes in Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and on the blog, we would encourage you to look at supporting us on Patreon. We have lots of different reward levels to pick from. I want to thank our current patron, Matt, who gives at the writer's room level. And when you give at that level, which is $10 a month or higher, you get to pick a movie every month for us to watch and review. His film we'll be watching tonight, which is Soundtrack to a Coup. I'm looking forward to it. I believe it's a documentary about an African president's assassination, if I know right. I've kind of stayed away from it because I want to go into it ready to be surprised by what I watch and informed and hopefully learn a lot of things. If you join our Patreon, you're going to find we have patron-exclusive podcasts. We've got several series up right now. We're currently watching and recording for our director spotlight on Ryosuke Hamaguchi, the director behind Drive My Car and Evil Does Not Exist. And look for the first episode of that to show up as a free preview on this regular podcast feed in March. But if you want to see the whole thing, you're going to need to subscribe to the Patreon. After we do our Ryosuke Hamaguchi series, we have a really fun television-centric podcast mini that I'll be sharing details about in the near future. I think it's something I know I'm going to have a lot of fun doing. I think Ariana is going to have a lot of fun doing it. And we don't really care if you have fun listening or not. We just do things for fun. On our next episode of the podcast, we've got a Brady Corbett double feature. First, we'll review his musical drama starring Natalie Portman, Vox Lux. And then it's the Adrian Brody-led historical epic, The Brutalist. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching. Our podcast music was provided by thepodcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com/free music.